Hello and welcome to CAPLA's Town Hall meeting, our first meeting of this sort. My name is Susan Forsell and I'm going to be your moderator for the duration of the webinar. I want to start by saying Waitkit, which is Shwepnik for welcome to all. And I'm honored to live, work, and play on the unceded territory of the Shwepnik peoples, and I'd like to acknowledge the territories across Canada that you are living, working, and playing on. So a couple of months ago at a BC Plan board meeting, we wondered how the pandemic was impacting those working in and with RPL and PLAR. We discussed having a webinar where we could share some of our lessons, talking about our stories, hearing about our challenges, our strengths, and some of the innovative strategies that have come through this pandemic, and how we can learn together as a community of practice. So when we first imagined this, we thought speakers from a variety of backgrounds would be a really good idea. And today we're honored to have representatives from across the country from different backgrounds. So we have an umbrella organization of BC Employment Services. We have a government official from the Nova Scotian government. We're pleased to have a representative from the Tourism Sector Council and a pedagogical advisor from a post-secondary institution in Quebec. So today's agenda is fairly quick and easy. Quick as in it's going to be easy for me to share. We have four guest speakers that are going to share their insight and some of the innovative practices on what they've had to do with COVID and how that's impacted their RPL practice. Then we're going to open up the platform for you to share your comments, your questions, your observations. And then CAPLA would like to know how we can help. So we're going to spend a few minutes at the very end to ask how we can help you. Just a few housekeeping items before we move forward. Please use the chat to ask your questions, make comments. Mary and Phil will be monitoring our chat, and Phil has offered to translate any French questions into English for us. Andy will be offering tech support and is also one of our four guest speakers. And for those of you who are wondering, the PowerPoints from all the guest speakers will be available at the end of this session. And last but not least, we are recording this session, including all the chat features, and that will include both private and group chats. So if you'd like to get this presentation sent to you later, please don't hesitate to send us a note, and I'll share our email address at the end. Quickly in your chat feature, if you wouldn't mind just letting us know who you are and where you're calling from today. And while we're waiting for that to be queued into the chat feature, just a quick walk through history of communication and to show you how far we've come and what pace of change we're living with right now. So 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, communication was often done through art. And this one here picture is through some caves that we have of the Shwepnik Nation that are talking about both hunting and fishing. We have Gutenberg's printing press from the 1400s, which really helped us communicate in our different languages to a bigger audience. Moving forward to the telephone, of course, we started using the phone in 1800s, and not even 3-4 months ago, it was a very common mode of communication. And quickly we had to pivot to being able to use different technologies such as Zoom, and that's what we're using today. And here's a quick picture of us preparing for the meeting last week. So on that note, I'd like to introduce the guest speakers for today's town hall. We have Janet Morse-Ready. Philip Monder will be our second guest speaker, followed by Maggie Simpson and Andy Brown. Because of our time constraints today, I am going to let them introduce themselves, starting with Janet. Janet, it's over to you.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. And thank you for inviting me to be at your town hall today. My name is Janet Morris-Reid, and I am the CEO of the Association of Service Providers for Employability and Career Training. We're also known as ASPECT. I am also the chair of the BC Prior Learning Action Network, and I am delighted to be here with you today. I am speaking to you from Victoria, BC, which is on the traditional lands of the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wisseknek people. Okay, great. So just a bit of an overview for what I'm going to talk to you about today. I will introduce you to Aspect, our members, the work they do, and a little bit about how we are funded. Then I'll share with you some of the challenge that Aspect and Aspect members have faced with COVID-19, along with some of the emerging innovations that have taken place in the employment services sector in BC. Finally, I'll talk to you about what we are learning through the pandemic, the work that Aspect is doing to move the sector forward, and how PLAR is an essential part of our collective futures. Aspect is an umbrella organization representing the interests of nearly 100 employment service organizations throughout the province of BC. We provide sector leadership, professional development, and we work with government to inform government policy with community-based practice. Our membership is a collection of nonprofit community service agencies, private businesses, private training schools, and we also have a couple of universities amongst our ranks. Some of the organizations offer only employment services to their clients, but many provide wraparound services such as housing, mental health supports, clothing, safety equipment, language classes, and many more services. So here we will answer the question, what do we do exactly? Aspect members serve anyone collecting unemployment insurance or employment insurance, those with barriers to employment, such as immigrants and refugee populations, those over 55 and youth under 30, Indigenous peoples, those struggling with mental health and addictions, those fleeing violence, and those with diverse abilities, plus many more that I've likely forgotten in my talk today. Aspect members serve their clients by providing training for basic job hunt skills, resume writing, interviewing, and soft skills development. They also provide one-to-one career development counseling in which PLAR plays a large part in determining a client's next steps. As well, they specialize in work training such as safety and first aid and other types of training. Attaching people to their communities through employment is the most important work that our members do and plays a critical part in the financial and social health of the communities in which they live. Aspect members also serve employers in their communities by hosting job fairs, job boards, delivering wage subsidy programs, work transition supports, customized training for staff, and in many cases working as an ad hoc HR department for small and medium-sized businesses. To wholly understand the impact of COVID-19 on the sector, you must also understand the funding model under which Aspect members operate. Employability supports are funded by the federal government through the Labor Market Development Agreement and the Workforce Development Agreement, as well as others. And most through BC's provincial government are administered, and some are direct funded from the federal government. Since 2008, this funding has moved towards an outcomes-based model in BC. And this means that contract payments are light for administration and program development, but the bulk of the funding is paid out when a client is attached to the workforce. With the new Work BC program, for example, service providers must follow up with clients for up to 5 years to check that they continue working, and the service providers are paid for the client connection to work. So what happened with the start of COVID-19? Service providers were conflicted with protecting their staff and clients' safety with the contractual requirements from their funders. There was little or no direction from the funders. If all are told to stay home and or are laid off, those outcome payments that the service providers depend on go away. Staff at Aspect member organizations who are experts in what they do were also at risk of being laid off. COVID-19 meant that the service providers had to figure out how to deliver their face-to-face programming online at a time when they themselves were trying to figure out how to create virtual workplace for their staff. All existing in-person programs had to move online. However, many of the clients did not have access to technology nor the skills to use it. Libraries and schools and community businesses with internet were all closed down. So in response, some service providers invested in technology for their staff and lent computer equipment from their workshop classrooms to their clients. They also used their community connections to find tablets, old smartphones, desktops, and laptop computers and get them into the hands of their clients. Within 3 to 4 weeks, most Aspect members completely redesigned their curriculum and moved much of their in-person services online. They reached out to clients by phone to check to see if they see how they were doing. And because being unemployed is a difficult time in a person's life, frontline workers spent much of their time providing mental health supports to their clients. Within their communities, service providers connected with their local task forces and economic development organizations to find out what was needed and provided their support and expertise. Everyone within the sector identified the pandemic as a perfect time to upskill, and much work was invested into developing new online content. On the association side, my organization, we met with government, the funders, to make them aware of the challenges that the service providers were facing and reminded them how essential employment services and supports would be once restrictions were lifted. We encouraged adjustments to the existing contracts so that service providers could stay viable throughout the crisis. At first, government leaders were preoccupied with their own internal operational challenges, but some funders stepped up and designed employment programming, and designated employment programming as an essential service along with the financial supports needed. Aspect started having weekly video meetings with our members, and surprisingly, the numbers of engaged members continue to grow week after week. At our first meeting, service providers were trying to figure out the push-pull of how to meet the contractual obligations versus keeping clients and staff safe from the virus. Some of the leaders on that first call shared that they made the decision to close, and within 24 hours, all service providers had either closed or were closing in the coming days. Services would continue remotely, but the actual bricks and mortar spaces were closed. Aspect has now created a series of webinars to help service providers transition to a virtual world. And we're also going forward with our plans to hold our annual conference virtually and are looking at opportunities to attract international presenters and cross-sector collaborations. So moving forward, there are some dangers ahead of us, however. The gap between those who are employment ready and those who are not is widening. This means that the most vulnerable in our society are at the biggest risk of being left behind. We are also seeing a larger divide between the have and the have-not communities in the province. Rural, remote, and Indigenous communities lack broadband infrastructure to stay connected. But there are also some great opportunities for us. With layoffs and businesses closing, the pandemic has created an environment of career reflection and a reimagining of what the world of work can look like. This is a perfect time for workers to upskill, change careers, and determine how they wish to live their lives. For the next year, while the job market may be unpredictable, workers can invest their time in their education and training. This could spark a more pronounced culture of lifelong learning. The needs of the reignited economy will encourage employers to invest in the people they hire. There has also been a hesitancy by employers to invest in training and education for their employees, and the new environment of post-pandemic job market could change all that. And finally, we may see a change in the attitude towards lifelong learning post-employment training. This could be a massive opportunity for PLAR as the government looks for ways to remove barriers to employment. PLAR will be an answer to many of the challenges they face to restart the economy. It's my hope that we will see more public investment in PLAR programs in general. So today, some employers are scrambling to find people to fill their positions. The CERB and the fear of the virus are keeping job seekers away. Aspect and its members are trying to figure out solutions to this. But in the meantime, they are doing all that they can to keep their clients engaged with the employment market. Many are preparing their clients to seek out educational and upskilling opportunities so that when an interviewer asks at their next job interview, what did you do during the pandemic? They will have a very good answer. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Janet. This is Mary speaking. I'm just going to share with you a question from our member Gail Hall, who asked whether when working with individuals in career development, you and service providers actually use the term RPL with those participants so that they become familiar with the term.
Yes, that term is used as well as others, but yes, that term is used.
Great. And Susan also posed a question about how RPL and PLAR can impact those with barriers to employment, but I think you addressed, she asked that right before you answered it. So
Okay.
I'm sure we'll discuss it some more.
Yeah, I think that the job market before the pandemic, we were looking at a real crunch to find enough workers to fill the positions of the growing demand. And I think now with the pandemic, it will be even worse. So PLAR before was an incredibly important part of the equation. And I can only see that in the future that it will be even more so. And that's one of the reasons why, you know, as BC Plan, we've been asking for public investment to make sure that the programs that are at different organizations and universities continue so that we can meet those demands of the market.
Great, thank you. And one last question for you from Dawn. How can Aspect members use RPL help to demonstrate work-ready skills beyond training and education?
Essentially, that's from the career developers. They have that information, and they're there to give people that come to them options. And especially as you're helping people that are perhaps a little bit older, the PLAR will definitely help them work their way into some type of education where they won't feel that they need to start over. And there are supports, provincial supports in place to help people mid-career go back to school and upgrade or upskill.
Thank you very much, Janet. It's Susan speaking again. Thank you for that great information and to share what your team did in the face of PLAR. Up next, we have Phil Mondor, and I see you just turned on your screen. So just a reminder, we have the chat feature going to ask your questions, which has been working really well. And Phil, I'll send you a quick note about halfway through your time.
Great, thank you. Okay. Just before I commence, I just want to make sure that you can see this well. Okay, here we go.
Working well.
Very good, thank you. Welcome everyone. It's always a great pleasure to connect with the CAPLA group. It's been a while and I saw a number of familiar names on the list, so it's great to see everyone again. And thank you for the invitation. So my name is Philip Mondor. I'm President and CEO of Tourism HR Canada. It's an organization that has been around for nearly 30 years. In the old days, people would have known us as a sector council, but in fact, we just go by other monikers today, but it's a very similar mandate. Briefly, I do work for a number of other sectors, although tourism is, of course, my main responsibility. And in that role, I also serve as an advisor on the Deputy Minister's Advisory Council for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. I sit on the Advisory Council for the Labour Market Information Council, as well as the Future Skills Centre, specifically the Committee on Skills, and the Ted Rogers School of Hospitality and Tourism. But with that in mind, I thought I would jump right into this presentation because of the time. For those that are not familiar with Tourism HR Canada, basically our mandate is to build a resilient and inclusive workforce. And we do that with a number of different activities. The area of PLAR or RPL is really, in our context, manifested in different ways, but we call it certification and assessment and similar types of things. So what I'll do now is just walk you through a little bit very quickly about an overview of the sector and the impact of COVID, and then what we've been doing as a result. First of all, the sector pre-COVID, actually just a week before COVID hit us and we were shut down, we were about to publish new numbers for the industry, the largest ever. We had just hit the 1.93 million workers. We didn't actually get a chance to publish that number, but effectively most would have known that we were at the 1.8 million number of workers in our sector for some time. That roughly is about 1 in 10 Canadians who are employed. And you can see the industry itself is made up of 5 different sectors, half of which are in food and beverage. And we go from there. And incidentally, the sector is quite large, or was. Today there's going to be a whole recalibration of this, but with 1.8 million workers, it was a larger industry than all of those combined that you see there. Finance, agriculture, forestry, hunting, real estate, mining, all combined, we were still larger than those numbers. And indeed, there are other sectors that are of larger scale in Canada, but you can see how it ranks. So it's a fairly large industry that we're referring to in all corners of Canada. When COVID hit, within the first 2 weeks, we lost 448,000 jobs. They were wiped out. And in the next 2 weeks, into April, another 433,000 jobs. So within effectively the first month, there was 882,000 jobs that were lost. This represents about 43% of the total employment in our industry. Fairly dramatic, as you could anticipate. It impacted absolutely all of the industries, and equally so. In May, we saw a little bit of recovery of about 83,000 jobs, but it has already flatlined since then. We do not expect the recovery to full numbers that you saw there for about 3 years, 3 years. So it's going to take some time if we should see the industry recover at the pace where it was. So you can imagine with this kind of hit and scale of activity, how transformative it is and the acute issues of the sector. This just breaks it down a little bit more, but to put another perspective on it, with that number of people that were unemployed or furloughed or laid off, that represented an unemployment rate in our sector alone of about 43%, where in the same window of time, the employment rate certainly went up for Canada, but it was at a lower rate. You can see it about 13. So acutely different. And I'll just leave this slide in here for the interest of convenience here, but if you want to look beyond tourism and just look at what was happening in the labor market, these are a few other details. Bottom line though, the message is that about 1/3 of the people impacted by loss of jobs were in this single sector. So it gives you an idea of the scale. So what have we been doing about this? Well, a lot of different things. First and foremost, we are part of something called the National Stakeholder Group, which is a committee the federal government brought together that convenes sometimes 3 times a week or once a week minimally. And that includes the Hotel Association of Canada, Restaurants Canada, the Tourism Industry Association of Canada, and the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada. So the 5 of us convene on calls with the federal government, as I say, 1 to 3 times a week, where we get an opportunity to voice what's happening in the sector, share the different matters, get briefed on some of the more current adjustments the government has made around policy. And so it's a conduit for us to try and work collectively on addressing some of the needs. In the first instance, most of the focus was on liquidity, but we have certainly moved now to focus on the labor market, which would have been what we expected. To do that, one of the things that this organization did was, since it is our focus and we work on behalf of all of the associations and governments and the education sector and others, we did design something we call the 10-point workforce recovery plan. It's part of a larger initiative we have. And indeed, in this plan, there are 10 items. I won't speak to each of them, but I will focus on number 10 because this is the direct link to the RPL question. This one, and by the way, this document is available on our website. It's downloadable. You can access the information on it. And there's a lot of supporting information as well that there are links to within the document. Now, the focus of number 10. Number 10 in this strategy effectively is looking at the resilience side. So we went from 3 stages of work, but resilience being the focus of number 10. And what do I mean by number 10? This should look familiar to you in terms of the RPL world, but this is effectively how we've characterized it. Now, the aim here, to be clear, it's about introducing a universal competency credential. That's a language used in this world that is understood by employers, but effectively it's really about us trying to demonstrate that people who are qualified have a portability about their skills, that they're transferable. And this is built on our most current future skills framework. This organization, through funding with the federal government, has been doing a comprehensive update to all of the competencies that apply to all jobs in the sector. It's a very large framework. In fact, the name Future Skills was something we coined before Future Skills Center was set up, not to confuse it with the work being done there as well. But this is a comprehensive map, which I'll show you in a moment. And those are all the current and updated skills that apply to the sector. One of the interesting things about COVID is we did do a careful look at what is contained in the Future Skills Framework to see if it was still resonant with the demands that COVID presented. Indeed, it was. We were able to add a few more things, but the flexibility and dynamic aspect of it enabled us to act very quickly on some program side. And I'll show you a bit about that in a moment. So we're basically talking about a credential or a form that enables people to demonstrate their qualifications regardless of the type of skills they have that apply to the sector. And of course, this is really about trying to go at the direct core interest of our mandate, which is to be resilient and mobile and inclusive. So what am I talking about in terms of the framework? Let me give you a few quick slides to show you what it means conceptually without all the details. But as a sector that has well over 400 kinds of occupations in the industry, we started to embark on an update to all of the understanding of what the skill demands were in the sector. One of the major pieces of work we started about 2.5 years ago is this framework, where effectively we've mapped out every single competency that applies to all of those 400 plus occupations that are embodied within the tourism sector and codified it by these 3 main levels. And the idea of these levels is that the taxonomies also will line up so we can demonstrate how complexity goes across them. So as an example here, you can see how a similar competency cascades across the levels from, in this case, the example being administer to manage to develop. Now, the other thing about the framework is it also has depth to it. And again, just to quickly illustrate what we mean by that for a moment, when we mapped out all of our competencies, we also showed how there can be depth even at a level. So in this example, develop contract might be the core competency, but then there will be specializations, if you like, about cascading deeper, like developing international contracts or franchise agreements. These are all, if you like, deviations from the original developed contract module. So we've done a comprehensive mapping. We are very near final stages of the validation of this map, which involved well over 30 town hall meetings across Canada, as well as a number of other mechanisms to set up the framework. The other thing about the framework, of course, is it does have the underpinning skills, which we've relabeled now social and employability skills. And those are just examples on this screen to give you a flavor for what they include. For those that are familiar with the essential skills work or the new work embodying it, you can see that that's contained within these, but indeed there are some other dimensions. These came about from research we did internationally so that we could align our framework with a number of other countries. And of course, the point behind the framework is that for any given person who wants to know where they fit, what competencies they have, and what jobs they can link to, the map can do it for them. Effectively, they can get their unique profile. This unique profile idea can be used to define a job or an occupation, as we would sometimes refer to them, to design a curriculum outline, even just an individual profile of their competencies. We are now moving forward with the update to all of our assessment system, which is really the RPL message here. Currently, as an organization, we do operate the largest competency-based credentialing system next to the trades, which has 54 occupations in it. Our credentialing system, which is Pan-Canadian certification, has 28 occupations in it. Both languages, it's available across Canada. A few of those are international. Our updated assessment system will now derive from our new competencies. We are moving to a dynamic assessment model. So instead of it being occupation specific, people can challenge the assessments and will be able to understand what their current competency is, period, within the map. And then we will show them what those links are to job attainments or occupational roles. We've just started on the assessment piece. It's very early days. It's a plan that takes about 2.5 to 3 years to complete with our testing. So the reason I bring this up is that number 10 in our COVID strategy, 10-point strategy, focuses on this whole initiative as being one of the main investments for future. And the reason for that is we needed to make sure that our workforce was going to be more adaptable and flexible to the demands. There are changing skill sets, there are changing roles, and we need the flexibility that is there. So this map is going to help us do that and accelerate it more rapidly. Already the framework has informed new curriculum and new training initiatives. We've been making a lot of material available online at no cost with huge take-ups, both in the academic setting and in the private setting. And in about a week's time, we're going to be launching a whole new toolkit for employers on recovery, also derivative of the competencies that were identified from this framework. That is soon to be launched. We're quite excited by it. So those are basically the initiatives that we've undertaken to try and respond to this. Indeed, there are other things, but I was just trying to hone in on some of the specific matters around RPL. And as you can see, the main aim of this as well is not just to serve the COVID period, but beyond. For those that are particularly interested in the impacts on this sector, one of the things that has been our major piece of work for us has been the research of the impact of COVID on a sector like this. We've tracked it from the beginning with early projections, and we'll be tracking over the life of this project for well into 2 years with partners like the Conference Board and others. So if you want to see something live and understand the impacts of something like this, that's so great, please check out our website. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mary, I believe we're going to ask one quick question, and then we're going to save the other questions because there were quite a few for the forum at the end of today's session. So Mary, what one question do you want to ask?
Sure. So a quick question for you, Phil. Dawn asks whether the framework is mapped to ONET.
The quick answer is yes. I mean, we certainly have used ONET as one of the sources of information. It is not the only. There are many other systems like ONET out there. So one of our first stages in doing this work is to identify where these links do play out. So yes, the quick answer is yes. And in terms of your question on contextualization, embedded within each of these competencies is a fairly deep section on context. So it not only talks about the link to occupations, to sectors, but it also gets into things like the frequency, the difficulty, the time it takes for someone to be proficient in those skills, and so on. Context is a major piece of the work because we have to understand how these things translate into actual practice, and indeed also how that might impact differently if it was applied in a different country. So the specificity in these units are quite deep.
Thank you. What great information to have. There's so many questions I want to ask you, but in the scope of time, we're going to slide over to Maggie Simpson now. Maggie, over to you.
Hi. So I'll just share my screen here. Can you hear me? Maybe just confirmation there.
Can hear you. It's a little low still.
Okay, great. I'll speak up. Just sorry, just give me one second here. Sorry for the delay here.
No problem, Maggie.
I'm just still a little bit used to this virtual technology.
It's amazing how fast we've come, though, in such a
Yeah.
short period of time.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Ah, there we go.
All right.
We can now see it.
Okay, I'll just get it full screen here. So is that everybody able to see that there?
Yeah, we can see it great.
Great. I'll just. So I don't have to keep track of the chat, do I? I can.
No,
Okay.
Maggie, no, you don't have to. Mary and Phil will, and I'll send you a quick note when you're about halfway through your time.
Perfect. Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today in the CAPLA Town Hall. And it's great to see so many people with us online. So my name is Maggie Simpson, and I am I work with the Nova Scotia Department of Labour and Advanced Education, and I am RPL coordinator for the province in Nova Scotia. So I'm going to talk about RPL in Nova Scotia, some of the adaptations and innovations that we're seeing from our RPL stakeholders in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and a little bit about just how important and advantageous it's proving to be to have competency-based learning recognition systems in place to mitigate the loss of employment, the disruption of the healthcare system, and some of the other impacts of the pandemic on Nova Scotians. So the Department of Labour and Advanced Education is the provincial government lead on RPL in Nova Scotia. And Nova Scotia is investing in RPL and IQR, or International Qualifications Recognition, as part of a workforce development strategy to mitigate some of the demographic and labour market challenges that our province is facing, and to realize the potential of human capital and contribute to economic growth and renewal in the province. And we're a fairly small province, as you know, Nova Scotia. We're just shy of 1 million people. But since 2010, our department has funded more than 100 sector-specific projects, which have helped to build RPL capacity, address labor shortages, and improve employment and educational outcomes for Nova Scotians. So these RPL initiatives in Nova Scotia, they really span the range of applications for PLAR and are being undertaken by diverse organizations, including career development and employment services, post-secondary institutions and other adult learning partners, sector councils, professional and trade associations, and immigrant serving agencies. And that really covers the gamut of low stakes assessments like portfolio and personal portfolio, career portfolio, and then to high stakes assessment for regulated occupations. So this graph is similar to some of the data that Phil Mondor was showing of you know, the economic impacts of COVID-19. The economic and labor force impacts. And so you can see that you know, there was a sharp decline in the labor force and employment in March and April in Nova Scotia when the province announced a state of emergency. There's obviously what the graph doesn't show is the social equity dimension. The employment impacts of the pandemic were greater on lower wage earners, people with lower levels of education, Aboriginal Nova Scotians and African Nova Scotians and other racialized communities, youth, and also immigrants. So how RPL is being used to mitigate the COVID-19 impacts in Nova Scotia, I'm just going to be giving 3 examples in 2 different occupations or regulated professions and in the area of career development. And just to note that there are, of course, many other RPL-based organizations in Nova Scotia who are demonstrating innovation and adaptation and resilience in the face of the pandemic, but I can only talk about a few today. So the first example I want to talk about is the Nova Scotia's Continuing Care Assistant RPL program. So this is, as many of you know, is a pioneering and nationally recognized program that provides an alternate learning and learning recognition pathway for continuing care assistants to address the high demand for certified CCAs in the province. Just quickly, the difference between the CCA traditional program, it's delivered by licensed educators in specific training sites, and applicants do not need experience in the CCA role. Whereas in the CCA RPL program, it's delivered by a licensed educator in an industry setting, a nursing home, home support agency, or other employers. And applicants are required to have experience in the CCA role or a similar role. So these differences between the 2 kind of pathways for the continuing care assistant program really resulted in some different outcomes for the program during COVID-19. And we saw that the traditional CCA programs had to be really essentially suspended because of the public health restrictions. The work placement sites were closed to public, including students, and the schools were closed. The schools are beginning to reopen now with physical distancing, but the placement sites remain closed to the public and to students. Whereas in the CCA RPL program, the program organized an emergency plan to support competency assessment on the job. And so students who were working and whose employers were willing to support the competency assessment were able to continue. The program continues, and 100% of the participants were employed prior to enrollment. So some of the modifications during COVID-19 in the traditional CCA program, it's kind of been a case-by-case work placement set up by training providers, schools connecting with students to see if they want to work, if they feel safe to work, and if they're far enough in their program to function in the role. In the RPL program, the admission requirements were adjusted to require participants to have employment prior to enrollment. And apart from an initial dip in enrollment at the start of the pandemic, enrollments have remained unchanged, whereas in the traditional program, there have been no new enrollments and most program activities are on hold. So the CCA RPL program continues to help participants, including informally, formally, domestically, and internationally trained individuals, continue to gain their CCA certification, to attach to employment, and by doing so, helping to ease some of the additional pressure also on the healthcare system during the pandemic. So the profession-specific bridging programs offered by ISANS, or the Immigrant Services Association of Nova Scotia, target internationally trained immigrants, or ITIs, to Nova Scotia with backgrounds in the trades, financial services, and professions such as engineering, architecture, and the healthcare professions. So ITIs are matched with local employers for work placements where they gain valuable Canadian work experience, they improve their language skills, they have profession-specific competencies assessed by trained assessors who are professionals in that field, and they can also access a wide range of other supports and services available to ISANS clients. The program has a proven track record of successful employment outcomes and enabling skilled immigrants to remain and practice their professions in Nova Scotia. So what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic? Well, all programs switched from face-to-face to online delivery. ISANS was already moving in that direction, but there was an explosion of activities done virtually, profession-specific orientation and study group sessions, town hall meetings by Skype for all of the healthcare professions, physicians, pharmacists, dentists, nurses, RNs, LPNs, CCAs. There's a whole program for international medical graduates that's offered online, live streamed practice sessions with simulated patients in preparation for the OSCE or the Objective Structured Clinical Exam. So participation has remained high, over 90% in many cases. And it's interesting to note that in some regions of the province or in some client groups where participation had been challenging, found that those barriers were removed. There's been an increase in digital literacy and skills of participants, and particularly the visible minority newcomer women. Facilitators have become more adept at virtual delivery, using a variety of methods to maximize engagement and learning. And the programs continue to achieve outcomes. The internationally educated immigrants are having their competencies assessed and recognized. They're addressing their knowledge, skills, and their gaps. They're gaining Canadian work experience. I forgot to mention that some work placements are continuing in an online format. They're progressing along their pathway to licensure and employment. Whoops, sorry. So the Nova Scotia Career Development Association, many of you are familiar with, it's an RPL-based organization that has led the development and implementation of a voluntary certification process for career development practitioners in Nova Scotia. It's also served as a training hub for Nova Scotia Works Employment Service Centres. So the RPL Transferable Skills is a five-session portfolio development program designed to help job seekers identify and document or provide evidence of their transferable skills for career planning and employment purposes. So prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the aim of this project was to develop and pilot a set of transferable skills portfolio materials designed to shorten the portfolio development process and make it really more accessible and useful to a more diverse group of job seekers as well as employers. So what happened during the pandemic? Well, the project date was extended after the provincial state of emergency was declared to allow some more time to complete some of the activities. But really the project quickly retooled to provide some modifications to a third pilot with job-seeking clients, as well as a training for career development practitioners to deliver both of these activities to support distance delivery. And the benefit of this obviously was to provide an opportunity to develop some virtual tools and methods for both program delivery and portfolio development by clients. And these and other modifications of the transferable skills toolkit make it more valuable now than ever, providing job seekers and entrepreneurs whose employment may have been impacted by the pandemic with portfolio tools, virtual portfolio tools and skills inventory tools to identify and document their skills. And these are obviously the essential social and employability skills that Phil Mondor was just talking about that are going to be so important in rebuilding our economy. So in terms of the path forward, our RPL stakeholders in Nova Scotia have provided many examples of resilience and innovation and adaptation in the face of this pandemic. And I've only mentioned a few examples today, but there are many others. And adult education, the adult education division that I work with, and Nova Scotia government really overall recognizes RPL as an important component of the economic recovery and a way to realize the value and potential of our human capital. So going forward, we're going to continue to support this work, and we're going to encourage adaptations to support distance delivery. We're going to continue to pursue collaborations and partnerships within government and with our stakeholders. We're going to be focusing more on digital literacy and transferable skills, as well as getting access, universal access really to high-speed internet. That's really a goal for us, because some of our regions do not have great internet access. The recent focus on systemic racism in our society, as a government, we need to be much more intentional and proactive about addressing racism and the lack of equity, diversity, and inclusion in so many of our institutions and society. It's as some have called it, the other pandemic that we're facing. And so we are applying an equity, diversity, and inclusion lens now more and more to our program planning and our funding decisions.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that was great information to hear. And as each of you have been speaking, I've been so reminded of the diversity of RPL and PLAR and how much amazing work is getting done across our country. I'm just looking at our time right now, Maggie, and we do have a couple of questions for you, but we're going to slide those into the forum in the next 10 minutes or so, so that we have time to hear from Andy and a little bit about the work that his team has been doing with RPL.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maggie. And Andy, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Okay. Okay, everybody. So welcome. It's great to be here with you today. My name's Andy Brown. I manage a RPL service towards a college qualification in transportation logistics. And I just wanted to talk to you about our experiences of basically having to transfer from a traditional face-to-face sort of experience for the candidates to 100% at distance. So I'm going to talk about the reaction, our adaptation, innovation, inspiration. Susan, can you just give me confirmation? You can see the title slide, please.
Yeah, everything's excellent.
Cool, no problems. So March 13th, college closed. This was the first reaction. I think that was the first reaction for all of us. Oh my goodness, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? By March 14th, I thought, oh, this could be interesting. I've been wanting to go online for a long, long time, but there's been many barriers in place. So I saw this as an opportunity. So the college came around and said, basically, you've got 3 weeks to go from 100% face-to-face to 100% distance. And this is what we did to make that happen. I think all the way through, the importance was that we remain positive as a team. Everybody remained positive. I certainly remained positive, and I thought lots of opportunities. We also needed to talk. We have a lot of expertise in the college. There's 6 pedagogical counselors, and we talked a lot about how we could do this. And the college was fantastic in setting up the surveying the candidates, surveying the faculty, surveying the content specialists to see if they had the technology, whether they were willing to do it, whether they had the hardware, whether they had the software. Some candidates, some teachers didn't have the hardware. The college got the hardware to them, and they did that all in that 3-week period, so we were ready to go. So the college were actually brilliant in supporting us in doing this. During this time, the candidates, we were sort of put them on hold. So we needed to basically keep them in the loop the whole time. So that was my job, to communicate with them. I set up Zoom meetings to get them used to the technology, and just kept them in the loop so they knew what was going on, and that they had to wait for us to retool everything. The content specialists were brilliant. I have to put, this is what I call my dream team. It's not my team, it's our team. These guys were brilliant, and these guys were the real reason for the success of the transition to at distance. So before we moved to at distance, we had two services. There was RPL Intensive, and that went Monday to Friday from 9 till 4, and it lasted for 17 weeks. The whole purpose of this is for recent immigrants to quickly adapt their knowledge and skills to a new context and to enter the job force. So I always say for this one, what's the candidate objective? Get a job, get on with a life, get on with the reason why they immigrated to Canada in the first place. Then we have RPL Individual, which is mainly targeted at people that are already working. Maybe they're underemployed, or they're looking for that next career advancement and they need a technical qualification to help them achieve that. That training was done on Tuesday evenings and about 20 Saturdays a year. They're all T&L professionals, and their objective was get a better job. So we needed to adapt the way we delivered this service. So we went from 100% face-to-face to 100% at distance in 3 weeks. How did we do this? Basically, it was done, I did a lot of thinking, but we had one team meeting with the content specialists. In a 2-hour meeting, we pretty much decided, I didn't do very much talking. I just listened, and whenever they said something, I went, yeah, that's fantastic, that's how we'll do it. Yeah, so we had to change the schedule, we had to change the delivery of the schedule, and we had to change the evaluations. But at the same time, we also had to think very, very carefully about the candidates themselves. So we've got CCC equals E&M equals R. So we needed to keep the communication channels going. We needed to show caring. We needed to build community. This is more important than ever, that connection at distance. Because we wanted to keep them help them remain engaged and motivated, so they will keep on going, so they will get the qualifications, so they can then get on with their lives, hopefully when the economy comes back. So how did we achieve this? The platform we used for our face-to-face interactions was Zoom, so we sort of started Zooming along. Rather than before, we used to deliver maybe 3 or 4 competencies at a time during the week, and we thought that's just never going to work. They're going to be completely overloaded. There's going to be massive cognitive overload. She said, okay, you're just going to do it one at a time. They're dealing with one content specialist with one competency. We then broke it down even more. We did it element by element. So competency is split into maybe 4 or 5, 6 sub-skills, and we did it element, evaluation, element, evaluation, element, evaluation. Also, before they were in a classroom for 6 hours a day, we knew we just couldn't do that anymore. So we developed what I call the technical sandwich. So in the morning, the content specialists would do the technical competency, and then they'd set them off to do some work using our website resources, and then they'd come back in the afternoon for clarifications and questions, a little bit of extra explanation of something if they needed it, and that would help them prepare for evaluations. In the middle, Richard and Marie-Josée took care of the communication skills, the language skills, the caring, the community, problem solving, answering people's questions, which was very important for people to feel connected and supported. We also found that although we had less contact time with them, we actually had more connection. The content specialists were great at connecting through email. They called people up. We had one-to-one Zoom meetings if people needed it. They texted the candidates. We also encouraged the candidates to create community by having their own free Zoom meetings to collaborate out of scheduled times and set up WhatsApp groups. So that was sort of like the training or gap filling element. We then needed to adapt our evaluations. Our evaluations are all authentic assessments, but they were basically done in paper and pencil tests that we then needed to convert to online platforms. One of our content specialists had good expertise in a thing called TIC-FP. So many of the content specialists moved over to this platform. And to do that, we again use the expertise like Jana and Marie-Josée, the TIC whisperers, and they basically developed competencies in them. They supported all their colleagues. A few of our evaluations are already on a learning management system called D2L, and Suzanne and Malaswara, the doyens of D2L, they again offered supports to their colleagues. Some of the evaluations we just changed to open books and emailed them. We already had a lot of assignments that were downloadable from our website, and people could have the option to do the evaluation through interviews if they needed. Very few people took that option. Okay, so going forward, things will never be the same again, and I actually believe that they're going to be for the better. Sure, there's lots of challenges, and this was by no means easy, but I think there's so many positives that come out of it. We're all closer. The T&L team is so much closer. We've done so much collaboration with each other and me with them. The candidates, we always try and keep that going as well. I go into all the meetings, or nearly all the meetings at the start. How you doing? How's things going? What do you need? Are there any issues? How can we support you? And the counsellors, we now are a very, very strong team, and we regularly meet and collaborate and share experiences and best practices. Also, through this process, we were able to bring people out that had dropped by the wayside, people that had had a little stop out. We were able to reach out to them, and now with this technology and being able to give them one-to-one advising, we'd actually be able to get them going. Throughout this whole process, we only actually lost one person to actually who actually had to stop for mental health issues, but hopefully she will come back later. And quite a few people that were working in essential industries had to take a study vacation and postpone re-engaging until September. So the future of our services, this will be decided with the team, but admissions are all going to be 100% at distance, and that's going to be much easier for the candidates and for me. Training, we have lots of options now. We can do hybrid, some in person, some online, which will hope to give a lot more flexibilities. Accessibility, we can now offer our services throughout the whole of Quebec if somebody has an internet connection and a computer. Evaluations, again, great flexibility. It's going to be online in the future, 100%. We're not there yet, but we're slowly moving everything across. And I'm really looking forward to having some virtual graduations in late July and August, because this is why we do what we do. It's our candidates' success. We're there to help them to reach their own personal professional development goals.
Thank you so much, Andy. What great information, and what a good example of how you can change so quickly in such little time. As I'm watching the clock and I see we have 23 minutes left, and we want to respect everybody's time. We said we would run this for an hour and a half, which gives us another 23 minutes. I'd like to move right into our open forum right now. And I'm just going to do a quick screen share. And in case your microphone's not off, we are getting a little bit of background noise. And when I checked, everybody's is off, but I'll just remind you that. So the open forum, can you see that okay?
Yes.
Thank you, Andy. Okay, so how we imagine this part of the webinar was an opportunity for people to ask questions, share experiences, make your comments. And I know there was quite a few questions as the guest speakers were speaking that we didn't have time to get to. So let's use this next 15, 20 minutes to talk with one another about how things have been going and what we can learn from each other. If you'd like to unmute your mic when you have a question, by all means do that. And we'll also be monitoring the chat feature. So does anybody have a burning question or comment they'd like to ask us? And Mary, I can't see the chat feature while I have my screen sharing on with my PowerPoint.
Sure, Susan, do you want me to begin with some of the questions that we didn't have a chance to get to? with the speakers, and then as people are thinking of broader questions and comments, they can join in.
Yeah, that's a really good idea.
Okay, great.
And I know there's a lot of questions. Yeah.
I'm going to start with some questions for Phil Mondor. So let me see. So Phil Belanger asks you how the framework that you discussed with Tourism HR Canada relates to micro-credentials and badging.
Thank you for the question, Phil. Actually, when historically the organization, when it currently offers the credentials, they're all around what we would call an occupational domain. But increasingly so in the last 5, maybe even 8 years, there's been much more of a demand for us to do micro-credentialing. This is one of the reasons for the movement to the framework as well. So in the new reality, as we advance with our new assessment model, micro-credentialing will be part of the options. At the same time, we know we will retain some of the occupational credentials that exist because they, sort of as a package as it were, are well known and have a certain resonance in the market. Like for example, the credential for a hotel general manager, they want to keep it intact. On the other hand, when you look at some of the skills for that are more transferable and are more general market skills, people are looking for the micro-credentialing options. At the moment, we do offer that, but it's cumbersome for us. It's not automated. And it's pushed us to move to more innovation on our modeling to enable that to happen. So that is very much part of the plan with the new model.
Great, thank you. I have a question now for Maggie from Tennille, who asks, how do we work with accreditation bodies so they are more likely to understand and recognize PLAR as valid?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think you know, we try to take as many opportunities as we can to talk to our regulators and through the FARPA, the Fair Registration Practices forums and breakfast meetings. I mean, I think it, you know, really comes down to just modeling good RPL and then trying and, you know, trying to promote promote RPL in with those organizations. But that is a very good question. What thoughts do you have about that?
Me personally,
Yeah.
I think there just needs to be some clarity around whose role it is to educate the accreditation bodies. Right now, as a learner pathways facilitator / instructor, we are trying to work in PLAR strategies into the annual and comprehensive reviews with programs. And so I created processes and templates that for those processes, and then a guide for that process, and then I incorporated the PLAR strategies into that, so we're pulling it back to development so that it's logical. But yeah, it's unclear now if program heads and academic chairs don't, and even deans don't understand the PLAR process and the validity. They're the ones that are having those conversations with accrediting bodies, so it's almost like they need to be open to pulling us in to do that education piece, but it's kind of unclear right now whose role that is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Can you remind me, Tennille, what your role is?
I'm with Saskatchewan Polytechnic.
Right.
It used to be the RPL office. It's now called Learner Pathways.
Right. Yeah, no, thanks for that question. That's
Yeah, that was a great question.
Was posed to Maggie, but I think relates to Tennille's question about ensuring that stakeholders understand the validity of PLAR, and may also relate to Andy's talk. Gail asked, how have folks dealt with assessing performance-based skills online?
right. So that's actually a really good question, and I didn't get really. I'm thinking of, if you're perhaps thinking of the ISANS example of the virtual, I guess the assessing, yeah, the competency-based assessment and moving online with the internationally educated professionals. And I'm not quite sure exactly how they're doing that. It's all, this is, you know, a lot of moving pieces, moving parts right now. But, you know, I'm guessing there's probably a virtual, virtual demonstration component, as well as, you know, some of the more traditional face-to-face assessment methods. And I know they're working closely with professionals in the fields. For example, in the engineering group, there would be, you know, professional engineers who are working closely with the candidates and, you know, coaching them and, you know, assessing to the Canadian engineering competency framework. So anyway, I'm not sure exactly what, you know, virtual tools they're using for that, but that's a good question too.
I mean, if I could maybe jump in there, it's like we've spent a long time developing authentic assessment tools. So we're in a transportation logistics program. Sure, there's going to be some academic limitations. We don't have a warehouse, we don't have a fleet of trucks, but we're trying to but the vast majority of the jobs that the people do after when they enter the workforce is basically sitting in an office with a computer and a telephone, then managing the transportation of goods through the supply chain. So you can quite often mimic that job. I mean, I always say with my guys, it's just like, okay, you're going to hire the person. What do you want them to be able to do? Okay, that's the evaluation tasks. And then it's a question of finding a way to replicate it and make it as close as humanly possible to the workplace environment to design the tools. And then moving them online is relatively straightforward. There's a few problems with like writable PDF forms and stuff like that we still haven't found solutions to yet, because you can't just send them out to people and say, hey, print them, because they don't have printers. But generally, if the tools are authentic, you can quite often move them into an online environment. Or you then have to decide, well, maybe we need to do them through an assignment and then be a short interview afterwards to increase validity, or through an interview.
Yes.
I'm wondering if this is a question that perhaps we could open up to the others on the call. So how folks are thinking about assessing practical skills now that this is all happening online. And another question that was posed to the speakers, but I think is a great open discussion question, Susan asked about which digital portfolio tools people are using and relying on at this time.
I can speak a bit to the assessment of practical skills. As an organization, as I mentioned earlier, we do deliver 28 certification programs, and 17 of those do require a practical assessment. Each of them are a little different because of the nature of the work and the context. In terms of COVID, we've had to look at how we adapt to the circumstance when we are not able to dispatch assessors that would normally go and observe or otherwise work with the client. And for the most part, we've been able to accommodate some changes. We've enabled people to do filming of their interactions and their activities, again, with a prescribed approach and with some support around it. We've added more structured interviews to our battery so that it's an option as an extra mechanism to verify some of the information. We've asked for additional evidence of some of what they do in some cases, and testimonials. But of course, we never rely solely on one assessment instrument. And so therefore, we're getting enough of a robust evidence portfolio, if you like, overall. And it's the option that we're giving people. What we're also saying to individuals is, this is what we can do. And if you'd rather wait, then we will just suspend the process until we're able to do it in the way that it's normally prescribed. And this way it gives people an option to manage one way or the other. Luckily, as well, as an organization, we do have relationships literally across Canada with our provincial network of associations, and they have been very instrumental to helping us by going into the markets and dispatching some assistance when we need them to go on site and or connect with locals. So it's helped us mitigate most needs. There are a few, though, that we're not able to respond to at all, and the best we can do at the moment is indicate to them that it will be an awaiting pattern, and the first opportunity that's available, we'll act on it.
Thank you. That was really good information. We probably have time for 1 or 2 more comments or a question. If anybody wants to unmute their mic and share a comment. Mary, did I hear someone unmute their mic?
Sorry, I just unmuted everybody. If you don't want to speak, turn your microphone back off again, please.
Thanks, Andy.
And Phil, I do have one last question for Phil Mondor, if you like.
Okay, that sounds great.
Sure. So Phil, Gail asked, are you working to help support both workers re-entering or joining the tourism workforce and tourism workers who are identifying their transferable skills to enter other sectors through your competency standards and frameworks? Wondering how important is it to have a national consistency and foundations?
Thank you. I think that's a very important question, and it's one that I really like. The fact is that in our work, we, of course, our primary aim is to make sure that we have a skilled workforce for tourism, but I'm always of the strong view that we cannot operate in a vacuum, and that it's in our interest to try to make sure that we're serving the broader labor market writ large. And indeed, people go in and out of tourism for different reasons. So we designed our systems with the view that we can demonstrate how people's skills are transferable to a variety of other sectors. And indeed, when we're even setting our standards and our assessment models, we do bring to the table people from affiliated sectors, ones where there's the likelihood that these skills would be portable or used. And you know, as I said to an earlier comment, I think asked around the mapping to other models. This is also one of the reasons we do look at things like ONET and other systems that are out there, because we're able to demonstrate how the competencies set for the Canadian tourism context, how it is that they apply, how they relate to other frameworks. And this way, we're more confident with being able to identify for people what those opportunities are. Incidentally, as a little side note to this, the Government of Canada has used our organization from time to time to test that very principle or that idea that you can set frameworks and have them portable. Currently, we are working with electricity sector. We've done work for the food processing. We've done work for retail, a little piece for construction. We're also doing a large piece of work for career development practitioners and others. And the next major project that we've been asked to do is to now look at the mapping of all of these frameworks as a demonstration to show the transferability of the kinds of skills that across the labor market. So I think, you know, there's movements in that direction, and hopefully we'll see a little more traction on that kind of activity. You know, again, with short period of time, I'm skipping over some general comments here, but it gives you a feel for the kind of work that's being attempted. And let's hope that we'll continue to see those opportunities even in austere times.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I want to thank each of the guest speakers for taking the time to prepare their thoughts and to so articulately share what they've been doing during this historic time that we've been living through. And as Andy said, the world changed in March, and having to pivot so quickly with such uncertainty, not knowing what the future held, and if you were doing the right thing at the right time has been really a difficult process. And I'm not sure about you out there across Canada, but for me to hear from Janet and Philip and Andy and Maggie, to hear what they've been doing and how they've been doing it has really provided a lot of hope. And so I want to thank you for taking the time to share your information. And I'm just going to slide forward to another thing we want to do, a little bit of a wrap up and some next steps. So one of the purposes for this session today was when we were talking a couple of months ago about how the pandemic was impacting those working in and with RPL, we wanted to know how CAPLA how we can help. And such a simple sentence, but such a powerful thought. We know the world has changed substantially. We've heard some amazing examples of agility and responsiveness, and really giving thought to what is it your clients or your learners need at this point in time. So moving forward, CAPLA will be offering a series of webinars in the fall and the spring. And perhaps in your chat feature, you could just type in, what do you need from CAPLA right now? What can we do specifically to help you? And if you don't have any initial ideas, don't hesitate to email us at the info@CAPLA at the address below. And Andy, did I hear you just trying to get a word in?
No. I just wrote in the chat. Tell us what you want, what you really, really want.
Yeah.
In the words of the Spice Girls, if anybody still remembers them.
I can hear that well. Yeah. So I just moved over to the chat. Yes, I can see that, Andy. Yeah. Are the rubrics shareable as direct evidence? Yeah, that would sure be nice to see. So what do you need from CAPLA at this point in time? And also, just the next bullet below, how would you like to get involved with CAPLA? So if you've got some ideas and you'd like to step in and you'd like to spend some time with us, don't hesitate to send us an email and let us know what you're interested in. Maybe it's a committee you'd like to work on. Maybe it's a research idea you have. Maybe you have an idea for a webinar that you'd like to help coordinate. Let us know how you'd like to get involved. And if you would like a recording and the PowerPoints from today, don't hesitate to send us a note at info@capla.ca. We will be able to share that with you. And just if you look quickly to the bottom of your screen, you can see those 4 bubbles. So we talked very quickly about the pandemic. I think we're living in it, so we didn't need to share a lot of information there. It was fantastic to hear about some of the innovative responses that have been going on so that we can learn together. And I think it's such a powerful tool to be able to share our stories, to be able to pull those pieces out that make the most sense for the work we do and the stakeholders that we're working with. And then that led me to the 4th bubble, which is a new word that is evolving called stragility. And I first heard it from a couple of professors at Schultz School of Business at York University by Alan Oster and Lisa Hillenbrand. And stragility basically means strategic and agile. And when you're faced with such huge changes like we are right now, the value of learning together so that we can be strategic, so we can be agile, so that we can help future-proof the people that we're working with in their career development. So last, I'd like to just thank some of the people that helped to make this webinar possible today. I want to thank Andy, Kaylee, Bonnie, Mary, and Phil for helping to coordinate this event. And I'm going to hand the mic over to those from CAPLA that are on the board. Are there any final words that you'd like to share with our audience? And we had just over 44 members today participating.
I just want to thank everybody, well, everybody who was here, but also just those are great questions. I'm just scrolling through the group chat and that's really awesome. So thanks for that, everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, Phil here. I just want to say the same thing. It's been very informative, very constructive. I think it gives us some good ideas and good understanding of what's going on across the country. And I think as CAPLA, there's a lot we could do to help, and I'm really anxious to hear from everyone as to how you think would best work for you.
Yeah, if you wanted to, you could put your email in the chat. Don't have to, but if you wanted to put your email in the chat, then we can, or you don't even have to send an email to info@CAPLA. We'll have your email and we'll be able to send you the recording of the session.
Thank you,
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And so that concludes our webinar today. I'm going to leave you with one last thought, and that thought is, how can we work better together? When I sat here and was hearing the stories about all of this amazing work that people are doing across the country, how do we help with those synergies? How do we get more involved with the work that you're doing, and vice versa, so that we can share the burden and go forward together? So if you have ideas on that, please don't hesitate to contact us. And I want to thank everybody today for participating, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Monday as I look out the window and see more storm clouds coming way over here in BC. So thank you, everybody, and I hope you have an excellent Monday.